and then would turn to me when that class comes up and is like, Caitlin, you must have a lot of thoughts on this, on this topic. And I'd be like, I didn't finish reading, what am I gonna do? But those kinds of expectations, I think, on us, that even by existing in a space, sometimes there's assumptions made of that we are automatically cued to talk about these things, and by proxy then, our white colleagues or cis-het colleagues don't have to take on that labor, but there's not that assumption made. I think is something for me that also is crucial in thinking about representation, is how is it that in a more equitable model we recognize what are some of the expectations projected onto our bodies from the jump that we don't consent to, but that this culture asks us to constantly labor for and be grateful to have.
Yes.
I don't really have much to add. I'm sort of struggling with this idea of parity, because that seems to me to be the end goal number, right? As opposed to like equity of opportunities. Because I feel like if we can remove those barriers, then some of these outcomes will work themselves out, right? So that's why I'm not so hung up on that end product, but also just more of the process. And I think that fits in more as the artist too, because oftentimes I'm not really thinking of the larger field as a whole, but I'm just focused on my own product. So for instance, with this book, I'm not thinking like, okay, I'm gonna be the first queer Asian to have his memoir with a big 5 publisher. I'm just trying to be as honest and truthful that I can to my own personal experience. And if I feel like if I do that, then, and if I can find people that recognize that, people, whether it's my agent, whether it's the editors, or et cetera, if I can find a pathway to get that product out there, then I feel like that's what I'm more focused on.
I'll say that representation is important, and from my perspective, from my lived experience, being from the U.S., Mexico-Texas border, born in Mexico to a very traditional Catholic family, right? And at a young age, my brothers would say, "Oh, we remember you would put on Tia's high heels and you'd be clack, 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 clack everywhere, and everybody thought you were so cute, right?" And even my aunt would like dress me up. Because she would say, "Oh, okay, I que sea niña, why don't you be a little girl?" And they'd have these pigtails. I'm not gonna show that picture. But, and then being in prison in that closet with a big old lock on it, having to perform what was the law of what a macho man was supposed to be. And then on top of that, being gay and being exposed to words that were used as weapons to describe who I was. And seeing other people that were like super brave about it, and they were like being their fabulous self, and just being talked down to being bullied, that I was like, I am staying in this closet, shutting the door, I'm gonna be quiet. And I will perform what I have to perform to survive in this world. And again, someone said in the other panel, I wish I would have had these shows, books back then. Because I've had to sit through all these romances of a man and a woman. All that representation has always been there. And so it wasn't until like college that you're like, oh wow, you leave this border that is so close-minded. And then you enter this space where it's so many people, different stories. Then you feel like, okay, I'm about to jump into the water. It's a little cold, but I'm gonna just do it. And so for me, representation, thinking about the intent and how you're going to represent something, not just to check a box, to say, oh, we got it, our token gay boy is there. No, but what is the lens that you're using? Have you done your homework? We're not all the same. Just because I don't like a certain thing that's considered, drag racing, whatever, you don't like it, give me your gay card. I'm like, I like comic books. Does that make me less? I'm just a different type of gay. And you better get used to it, right? It's the multiplicity of it. So in regards to what I've been watching, consuming, reading, Heartstopper was a series that I really got into. And it's rare when a piece of literature or a show really activates an emotional response for me. It takes a lot for it to really reach. For me, the importance of that story between these two boys, one who was outed and then talked about and then another one who's like this, like the straight looking athlete jock, and then how they have to come to grips in that there's a connection there. So for me, the illustrations of that novel and how they translate into the visuals of the show is very thoughtful, because, and I'll come back to Heartstopper, when I first, like, representation, it was shameful to even think about it. And in the Mexican home, no se habla de eso. So when you look at Encanto, you don't talk about Bruno, that's the same thing. That's the same story that I could relate to. I had to house sit for a professor, and they're like, just feel comfortable, whatever. And I had this big screen TV, and I was like, okay, I was watching TV, and then I see this thing, it said, Queer as Folk. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna press play, and the intro is just like flashy neons, crotches, cowboys, very bare-chested men. And then it's like, I'm like, I felt like no one's watch this. Like, I was always like, okay, it's almost like someone watching Orange is the New Black, right? You're just like, you don't want your mom to hear what is going to be coming out. So that type of representation for me was very much about like the body, the drugs, the sex, and the club scene of this kind of lens. I'm like, is that it? Do I need to go into the space to really be that? And so for me, coming back to like Heartstopper, it's those spaces of the in-between, between this connection. It's not even like, it doesn't get to the point of romance, but there's always a hesitation, but there's a connection. And she does that beautifully in the written word and the show of that, like, that is much more than just that. This is a valid story, coming of age, and not knowing what you're feeling, and how do you negotiate those complex emotions of this identity. Yes, you can be a rugby player and be like, very physical, whatever, but you can also be like this nerdy guy who likes music, who has his room decorated with like, lights and stuff like that. And the other show that I loved was Schitt's Creek. And so the best,
Alexis.
yeah, the best compliment I got from one of my students was like, Mr. Garza, you give me so much David vibes. But the best scene for me between David and Patrick is that he doesn't force anything on him. Here he finds a guy who's like, his parents don't know, and then they're starting to talk about like getting more physical, what's their dating gonna be, the relationship, and so he's like, I'm not gonna force you to do anything you're not ready. And I think those stories are important to say when you're in this kind of state.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think the first time I ever saw queer representation in a comic that spoke to me was when I was a littler, and reading Love and Rockets comics my brother brought home. Just blew my mind, right? So, this is always something that I'm curious about. Thank you so much for sharing that. What other texts do y'all find yourself returning to that speak to you or that have been definitive for you as queer folk?
I forgot to mention Bingo Love was the very
that's
first
such a good one.
comic that ever made me cry. And it's the same thing, like you mentioned, like the representation prior to recent, I guess, has been mostly shameful. And to this day, like the family that knows about me, I never came out. I just started talking, and people figured it out or not. But when I read Bingo Love for the first time, I was sitting there just crying buckets because the concept, if you're not familiar with it, is two girls that were like 14, 15. They kind of fall in love in school, and then when their families find out, they separate the girls. And so they live full different lives, heterosexual marriages, the whole thing. And when they're senior citizens, that's when they meet again at a bingo game. And so first of all, but as you get further into getting to see their relationship once they re-meet each other and the way it affects their family and stuff like that, it doesn't just focus on we met again, we found love, end of story. you got to see the part of their relationship and what happened because they did come together older, like what life is like as older queer folks. And man, I just buckets. And I'll read it like, you know how you have those things that you feel like you want to cry?
Yep, I know.
But nothing
I'm
prompts, so
listening
you're just like, no, I'm just gonna read Bingo, you know, and then you're just like crying buckets. Yeah, so that's one of the ones that I think, in terms of sheer positive, like it addresses the trauma, it addresses the problematic aspects of it, but for the most part, it's just like, this is the story of the life that these two girls had to deal with, and when they became women, it was hard, but they figured it out, you know. I think more things like that would be amazing, because I think the younger generation now, they get to come out so early, some of them. And, you know, it's not that it's not still a struggle, but they have access to queer identity so much earlier than even I did, and I'm 45 now. Had a really gay life. I had a gay uncle. My mom worked in hair salons. I was a dancer. There's gay people all around, and yet I couldn't tell people what my deal was.
Yeah.
And I didn't, because I never saw anybody that was like me. When I started having my first crushes on girls, like I had crushes on boys, I understood what that was. When I started having crushes on girls, I thought I wanted to look like them. I had no idea that what that little tingle wasn't because like, oh, she's so pretty, I wish I looked like her. It was like literally like, I want to touch things. And I didn't get it. Like I didn't know people like me. I knew gay men, and I knew 2 lesbians that my mom was friends with who were cops. And I was like, I'm not like them. I'm kind of more like these guys, but they have outies and I have an innie. You know, so my whole deal was like, I couldn't figure out what my thing is. And if there was just a show, you know, like Schitt's Creek or a book like Bingo Love or something, when I was a kid, it would have been a lot easier, because by the time, I remember telling people I wasn't bisexual, and I was with a girl and a boy at the same time. Like I was like, because bisexuals weren't, they still kind of aren't like
Accepted.
We're not really that accepted. We're one of the bigger parts of the community, 51%, but we're still weird in some ways. And since I'm also poly too, I have a lot of questions that I have to answer about that. And yeah, man, if there was just like, I don't know, a bisexual polyamorous person that was kind of like girl boy at the same time, it would have helped. It would have taken a lot less. I was in my 30s before I really vocalized what my deal was, even though I was pursuing the life.
So I'd like to talk about representation and how it's so important, because when I was in school, and I was a non-traditional student, I was 36 when I got my bachelor's degree. And I would go home and I would show my mom all these things, like, look, Mom, did you hear about this? And look, did you learn? Did you know this? And so when I showed her the poem, Why Am I So Brown? She cried and she's like, why didn't I have this? My mom is, you know, has a beautiful bronze color, and she would say, I wish I had this. She was so shamed. And then that shame goes on to us as women. And so I identify as you know, I'm a cisgender woman, but the shame still exists in intersectionality. You know, like I'm a woman, I'm Mexican American, and thank God for my education, my undergrad, because I learned that I could name myself. Because my Dr. Vroman would say, if you don't name yourself, they're going to call you something. And so you need to let them know. And so it's very important to have representation. I am now a grandmother. I have, you know, a young 6-year-old granddaughter, and she has the same color as my mom. And so I want her to know, you know, that she's beautiful in that way. And we're talking about like public space and private space. When you say that you wanted to be in that closet, it exists for us. How do I perform here, and how do I perform there? And is it okay here, and is it not okay there? And so we have to perform this heteronormative, you know, script. We have to perform this, you know, this, what is it, that politics of politeness, you know? We have to perform this way. And so because I couldn't perform my way in this patriarchy, I end up getting sick and I get scratchy voices, and that's telling me, Rose, somebody's not letting you speak. So it's very important to have representation. Ralph Macchio was the only brown guy that looked like my brother, and I was like, oh my God, that's so awesome, look at him. And like, oh, he's not Mexican. So, you know, representation matters. And I know that there are still tropes, and I know you talked about Wakanda Forever, and I was so happy. Everybody, who's not happy to see this beautiful, you know, Azteca warrior, you know, who's not happy to see that? And then they fight the Wakandans. I'm like, why? Why is we're still brown against brown? What the? Like, I would have rather had them fight the bad guys, you know, together. So that's why representation matters, and a critical eye is still that the mainstream media still perpetuates this, you know, dominant culture.
Absolutely.
So hopefully the future of that is like the Wakanda Forever part is the what's happened in the world, that white supremacy pitted us against each other, and then we meet and we learn and we figure it out, and then hopefully part 3 is we work again. When we join forces, like maybe that'll be, if we can reframe it, or if they can reframe it to a way where it's just like, yeah, we started out with a problem because white supremacy made us do this, and so now that we know, now we're gonna team up, and the 2 biggest global powers, and like, oh, it will be amazing. Hopefully that's what happens. Someone get Ryan on.
Submit the idea.
Yeah.
Can I talk a little bit about representation from a generational point of view?
Please.
Is that, you know, I'm probably the oldest person on the panel here, and I grew up in the AIDS generation of our community, and when I was first starting to write my book, I really wondered if younger gay people would even care that we had gone through such trauma that, you know, that literally, I'm of that generation where I thought that if I made it to the age of 30, that would be victory, right? I really thought I'd be dead by the age of 30. You know, and all the battles that our generation had to go through securing any type of rights, not just, you know, marriage, employment, et cetera, et cetera. But then, you know, I didn't think that young people would even care. And in some ways I wondered if maybe that's a good thing, because that's what we fought for, right? So that younger gay people didn't know that we had to go through all these things, that they could actually enjoy the fruits of the labor that we went through. But, you know, so I think I was content with that like, okay, maybe young people are not going to read my book. They won't care, but there'll be enough people like my age who will connect with my book. But then with the recent backlash, you know, against trans rights and drag queen hour and stuff like that, it really has changed my thought on it, because it made me think that, you know what, for younger gay people, they need to know that other generations actually maybe even had it much worse, and that there will be a brighter day, and that you just have to be confident, and you need to, you know, stand your ground, you know, and that this is the way civil rights is attained. You know, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so I think that in that sense, that representation, you know, for my book does matter to me. And I want young people to know that, yes, you're being attacked now, but you know what? You know, thankfully, you're in a much better place than we had it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, just as anecdotal, I'm teaching a course on queer comics right now, and my students are really invested and interested in queer history. And have felt that they want to see more queer elders, that they want to see queer history, that they want to know the past so that they know where to go. So I've been, you know, we got a class reading No Straight Lines, that anthology, and there's a ton of comics in there about the AIDS crisis in particular. There's a lot of naivete about that time, right? The things that they don't remember or know. So I'm very excited for your book. I was wondering if y'all could talk about specifically what kinds of things you would like to see in media. What kinds of gaps in our representation do you see? What kinds of stories you think need to be told? Like your memoir, I think, is one of those texts. Like I was saying earlier, I've never read a book like that, right? So I'm so excited
It's
about
got
it.
AIDS, it's got crack cocaine, 5 people get murdered by 10 or 18. Woohoo! Good times. Yeah.
5 stars.
No, but I think for an Asian American story, it is interesting, because most people think of the Asian American story as it's a more sanitized,
Yes.
you know, version. And no, our community has gone through struggle. We deal with a lot of working class issues. We deal with a lot of poverty issues, things like that. And so
Angel
that's what I'm
Island
hoping.
existed.
Yeah.
They used to put us on an island just to make sure we were okay to
Yeah.
bring, you know, like bring to the mainland. Like,
Yeah.
I think the not knowing what our antepasados were like, you know, like I learned from my very good friend back there, Mary Lou, that the indigenous culture had two-spirit people. And so had we known that, we wouldn't be so struggling. We wouldn't, like, had they not stripped it away, you know, had they not made it ugly, you know, what kind of mental health, you know, would we have if we knew that it was a beautiful thing in other cultures? But in this culture, like Bell Hooks, who's my saving grace, this is what we're up against. And so I feel I want to share everything that I can with anybody around me. Like, did you know? Did you know? Like, before this, we were this, you know? And that it's power. It's power to reclaim that voice, to have that power. It was, and we can probably say we never lost the power because we have it innately, but the societal pressures strips it away.
I think I'll also, you know, that point really resonated with me, and I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that, you know, one of the things that's always front of mind for me is that, you know, my own coming out process is not complete. It's an ongoing process. As a Salvadoreña who can't share my queerness with my family and with the people that I care about most because of that homophobia, I think about that intentionally in when I'm teaching, and if it's over Zoom, how can I make sure that for fellow folks like me who, when you go home, home doesn't make space for your full self, that it's possible to have those abilities to kind of know, okay, if we're reading something that's going to cause an issue with your tias or with your mom, like that you have that ability to sort of figure out what space is going to be safe to read that in. But I think also in this experience too of as being someone who's constantly navigating and negotiating which spaces are safe for me to be my full self in, I think it also is what makes me wonder, right? What is possible if I have an ancestor in my family who is queer or who was queer but hasn't spoken that to power because of the same worries and feelings, right? And so I think that my hope always with representation is that we will be fully embraced in these spaces, that we don't have to be perfect to belong in these spaces, but I'm also very defensive of the fact that for many of us there's this pressure of I have to perform a perfected ableist self who's always laboring, who's always ready to go, who's always producing something to feel safe to belong in or even join a community. And so I think that I just really want to underscore that I think when it comes to representation and even in our kind of intercultural spaces, how do we hold space for each other to belong without having to be laboring to prove ourselves as worthy for that support? But also as well, I want to plug the work of Brina Nunez, who with Laneja House with Lawrence Liddell, their amazing work, and especially Brina doing work as an Afro-Salvi Guatemalan. For me, it was huge to be Salvadoreña, to see a Central American creator who's talking about being queer, because especially growing up in Southern California, I hadn't even realized how accustomed I had become to always contorting myself to fit into spaces that usually expected me to be Mexican or Chicana. And so in media as well, if we do get a Salvadoran character, usually they're played for humor, or they're a side character who's written as a narcos kind of character. And so those are things as well that I hope to see, that when we're thinking about belonging in our communal spaces, that there's also a kind of way in which there's space made for our Central American creators to also be kind of in that position to have their work read and celebrated as thinking about Latina identity in different capacities.
I'll jump in to piggyback your comment. Beautiful. The coming out story, right? Hollywood sometimes glamorizes it, and they make a spectacle of that coming out. And it's not always happy and confetti and sparkling glitter everywhere. My coming out story was painful. There was a little bit of heartache. And it's almost like the people that you came out to, they expect you to like transform into this like, I don't know, like gaze unicorn that parts rainbows, I don't know. And that you were going to leave that tribe that you were performing in and find a new tribe.
Mhm.
And it was like, no, I'm still me.
Mhm.
You know, I'm still gonna be the same person. So to have that kind of story, then I found representation in Gabby Rivera's Juliet Takes a Breath. Because that coming out story was exactly like, I mean, she slams the table. And that's a full panel. I mean, she's looking right out at the viewer. And the text gradually gets larger in each bubbles. She's like, I am, and boom, right? And then the mother storms out. The next panel is the dialogue with Juliet, and then the mom is not in the panel. But the reader knows that she's in a room, the door is there. And then the only thing is that she slides a picture. So I think like works like hers, Juliet Takes a Breath, really it gives the readers that narrative, but it doesn't just stay in that moment of trauma. She continues to navigate these different points and maps different passages in her journey as what she wants to do. She wants to be this activist, she wants to be this. And she's learning about different histories. And I think the way she leaves it at the end is very much about healing, because she literally, and we've been talking about transformation, serpents, and symbolism. I love the symbolism of when she gets her haircut.
Yes.
And that is like monumental, because she finally sees herself through her own gaze, her own power. And whereas again, growing up Catholic, they share these stories of like Samson and Delilah, that Delilah cuts his hair and he loses his power. In this better version, it's like she gains it by shedding it. And then it leaves it with like, what's the possibility? That page and the pen, what's next? So I think for stories to leave us with that, what if? And not just reach that singularity is what I see in Juliet Takes a Breath, and is what I want to continue to see. Not everything is all joys, but don't linger too much in the hurt, but focus on that in between, mapping, evolving, continuously changing, and being open, right? One of my students, I teach at an all-girls school, so sometimes I'll say, you know what, ladies, it's not just 1 month. We're gonna celebrate these voices every day, all year. Like, that's where I come from as an educator. And this month, we're celebrating. And then I'm like, no, it should be embedded in the everyday curriculums that now we're able to map ourselves, right? If you don't like something, then do something. And in my classroom, I have that freedom to affect them, because I encounter these students with whatever baggage they have. And it's the internal baggage, the mental baggage. So it's important to have stories like Juliet Takes a Breath. And even the title, to take that breath. Have we been holding our breath?
Yes.
And then finally, she's able to take that breath. She's come to that point of transformation, which I think is super important to have. So I'm lucky, and I'm happy that I had that, and I always go back to it. And I find something new, whether it's the color palette that it changes throughout, the intensity of each character, beautifully illustrated that point of the journey of someone who is and yeah, this was the creation that came to mind, which was one of the stickers that everyone should have. But if you want to see more of my artwork, you can go to GoIrish626 on Instagram. But for me, it's a multiplicity of things. Something like this. The idea that we're all here, we come from different angles into our collective, our community, our tribe, and discussing different things. So it's a lot of bridging. So right now I'm in this world. Soon I will travel to the other world that I inhabit as an educator. And how do I make those connections? How do I let these young women in my classroom not be afraid, but like, you know, you have a voice, use it.
Absolutely.
And you're safe to do it in my classroom. So, yeah.
I wish, oh, sorry, no, go for it.
I wish I had a book like that for my kids. I really thought that I was giving my kids the space to be who they were, you know, to let them be, so to speak. And there's a family story between the three of us, and it was right before Valentine's Day. My son was probably about 14, and we were gonna watch a movie, and at that time, you know, I had like 100 DVDs, right? Like you could buy them for 25 cents at Goodwill or whatever. And so we're looking, and I was like, do we have to buy a present for a gift for anybody? And he was like, no. And I said, anybody? And we're like both going through the movies. And I said, so nobody? You don't have like we should go get flowers or a card? He says, no, Mom, I don't have a girlfriend. And I said, well, it doesn't have to be a girl. No, Mom, I'm not, just because I don't have a girlfriend, and he got really loud. My daughter, who was 2.5 years older, she was in the kitchen, and I could hear her voice, and she said, just answer the question. She asked me too. Okay. But fast forward 8 years, and she comes out to me as, she says, queer. She says, I've been wanting to tell you, and I was like, why didn't you? I thought it was okay. She says, I think you did, but I always thought I had to be a straight girl.
Yep.
And I was heartbroken, because I thought that I was doing what I needed to do to give them that voice, but the big overarching patriarchy heteronormative voice is loud, and even in me. So I had to learn, and I wish I had those kinds of texts in my house so that she could have had that voice. But she was about 22, so I think still relatively young. And so yeah, that's been a story for us, and I hope to be able to add more of those kinds of things at home. So thank you.
Well, I think we have time for one question, maybe. Does anybody have one?
I have a question. We talked about Schitt's Creek, and it was really intense because I love it. And then when they had that marriage scene, I don't know if you've seen it, but my wife and I and my kids, daughters, both there, were watching it, and we all thought something violent was gonna happen. We were all traumatized. We're like, oh my God, someone's gonna break the window, there's gonna be so beautiful, right? But so my question is how do you react to that, and how are you responding to that in your work? That trauma. I'm having trauma right now. You know what I mean? But it's because what are you doing? I know what Hector, what you're doing is so incredible, but I'd love to hear your take on
Such a good
those
question.
moments.
So in my work, I've been, and like I said, if you're on there, you can see the collages that I've made. So you're not just looking at me, but you're looking at the work. But I work in collage. I've been working in collage now since I started writing. That's the process I'm in right now, writing the dissertation. So it's Latinx graphic novels, LGBTQ as mapping new narratives of resistance. And I don't know what it is about the cutting of paper, pasting, reassembling, clearing the table, shuffling. Oh, that landed there. That looks good. I don't know, that to me has really been what I do in my work, but also what I am representing. I'm not as afraid anymore. I don't know what his name is, escaping my mind because my heart is racing too fast. The swimmer that does the knitting. During his breaks, he's always knitting sweaters. And so in one of the collages that I have him and his swimming speedo with a cape, says super on the back, and he's coming out of the shell, which is the Venus, the Milo Venus painting, where she's coming out of the ocean. But in my interpretation, my reimagining, it's him, and kind of some images, some Rocky Horror Picture Show, kind of thing like that, because there's a lot of ideas at play, a lot of ideas of you don't have to just be one thing. And I say that because I had been asked to curate, and I'll an all-women's show in a gallery, and I told the director, I said, okay, Pedro, I love you, but are you sure that's the wisest thing? Because I don't know if you noticed, but I am a man. And she's like, no, está bien, tú dale. I'm like, okay. So I did it, and a person walked in and they were looking around, and they were like, came up to me and they were like, well, why you? And I was like, she was right there, and she was like, because he celebrates women in his work, and he also embodies this masculine and feminine all in himself, and he does it in a way that empowers. So that's why I chosen to do this, and I feel like that's the thing of what does the new, I don't know, image of a little boy from Mexico growing up in the barrio coming to the United States looks like. Not all of them are gonna wear cowboy boots. Not all of them are gonna wear whatever. They're gonna be different. They're gonna have all sensibilities. And the last point is that when my mom was in the hospital, right before she entered hospice, I was helping her in the hospital. And usually that task in a Mexican family to help your mother clean her is to the woman. The men don't do that. And here I was in the hospital on my knees with these buckets cleaning her, and she looked at me and she said, well, I had told her, I was like, you know, I'm like my other brother Jose. And she was like, I know. And she goes, you've had to be daughter and son to me. So I guess that was my coming out to her. So it's not just about one or the other, it's about a multiplicity of things. So I see that in my work. And that's why I keep going.